the first director of Finnish Center for Evidence-Based Healthcare and Nursing Research Foundation, Arja Holopainen, will have the opening remarks, and after that she will tell you about the model for developing evidence-based practices called FinYhkä. Please welcome Arja.
Once more, welcome, dear Greg, and all our colleagues who are remotely involved in this webinar. My name is Arja Holopainen, as you heard before, and I am a director of the Finnish JBI Center for Evidence-Based Healthcare. It's my pleasure to introduce Greg Lockwood, again, who is Associate Professor and Director of Implementation Science Unit at JBI and University of Adelaide in Australia. It's really fine that our JBI Center got this opportunity to organize the webinar in connection with Greg's visit to Finland. At the same time, I would like to thank the research unit of Nursing Science and Health Management at Oulu University, which made Greg's visit to Finland possible. Thank you, Professors Maria Kääriäinen and Kristiina Mikkonen, and of course, all other colleagues in Oulu. Greg, if I remember correctly, and I know that remember it, this is your third time in Finland. And your previous visit was already 12 years ago, too long time. It was spring 2010, when we finished our center's application to Joanna Briggs Institute, and you and Alan gave us the first comprehensive systematic review training course in Finland. So welcome to Finland after a long time. I will briefly tell you about our JBI Center, which was established in October 2010. We were then very proud of being the first center in Nordic countries. Now there are a center in Denmark and in Norway they have a group, affiliated group. Okay, but JBI don't have a center in Sweden. Not yet, maybe in the future. Currently, JBI has 78 centers worldwide. There are 20 centers in Europe, of which 12 are centers of excellence and 8 are so-called affiliated groups, which means that they can become centers of excellence if they meet the required competencies and criteria set by JBI. The Finnish Center is located here in Helsinki, and we are operating nationwide. Our center's activities are managed by the Nursing Research Foundation, which together with 4 other organizations form the Finnish Center. Those other organizations are Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare, Department of Health and Social Management from University of Eastern Finland, Kuopio University Hospital, and Southeastern Finland University of Applied Sciences. To support its activities, the Finnish Center has 7 official associate partners, which also are improving evidence-based healthcare through their activities. These partners include 5 hospitals from different parts of Finland, University of Oulu, and Oulu University of Applied Sciences. So we could say that from the beginning we have valued national collaboration for promoting and supporting evidence-based healthcare in Finland. As JBI describes in this slide, if we have better evidence, we receive better outcomes and brighter future in healthcare. Therefore, we need to produce systematic reviews, clinical guidelines, and support structures for evidence generation, evidence synthesis, evidence transfer, and implementation. In Finland, this is also required by the Healthcare Act, which obligates all healthcare professionals to base their practices on evidence whenever it's possible. Dear all, you are welcome to this webinar, which offers brief presentation some of those support structures for evidence-based healthcare in Finland, and Greg's presentation concerning JBI support structures for implementation. Next, I will present a model for developing evidence-based practices, which we call FinYhkä in Finnish. The development of the model started at Nursing Research Foundation in 2008, and it was published 2010, thus the same year when the Finnish JBI Center was founded. The FinYhkä model was developed in 3 phases. First, we searched and evaluated the relevant literature such as systematic reviews and the previously developed evidence-based models. Then we developed the first draft of the model. In the second phase, we presented the draft of the model to expert panels, which included nursing professionals, for example, nurses, nursing managers, and nurse teachers. Then we conducted focus group interviews for these experts, where the focus of the interview was the content and comprehensibility of the stages of the model draft. In a third phase, we continued the development of the model by using the feedback from interviews. At the same time as we developed the model, an action plan for nursing drawn up in Finland. This document published by Ministry of Social Affairs and Health, and it included statements for evidence-based nursing. So we also took those statements account when we finalized the model. The model has been piloted in Finland and it is currently being further developed based on the feedback received. The aim of the FinYhkä is to support nursing professionals to develop consistent evidence-based practices. The consistent practices improve quality of care and patient safety as well, decrease unjustified variations between organizations and care providers. It is important that researchers and educators, together with nursing staff, cooperate at the international, national, local, and organizational level for producing, disseminating, and implementing evidence into healthcare. In addition, collaboration is needed when developing consistent evidence-based practices and ensuring nursing professionals have sufficient competence in evidence-based practices. This slide describes responsibilities and requirements at national, local, and organizational level towards supporting the development of evidence-based nursing and midwifery. For example, at national level, we need national strategies and multidisciplinary collaboration for ensuring evidence-based healthcare. National organizations have responsibilities on the production of clinical guidelines and systematic reviews for healthcare. In Finland, for example, Nursing Research Foundation, Finnish JBI Center, and Current Care are this kind of organizations. At the local level, cooperation is needed to identify local development needs and to transfer the evidence and consistent practices to the healthcare. Therefore, managers at local and organizational level should decide strategic directions for the development of consistent evidence-based practices and coordinate implementation for national strategies, such as ensure health professionals' competency. The development of consistent evidence-based practice at the organizational or unit level is a process which is triggered by the need to develop current practices. Triggers can be, for example, patients' feedback or notifications from HIPRO, which is a reporting system for patient safety incidents in Finland. Once the need to change current practice has been identified, it is important to seek reliable evidence as a basis for development, such as a systematic review or clinical guideline. Then the next step is to transfer evidence to the context in question. This means that individual nurses can use this evidence-based knowledge in their decision-making, which facilitates consistent practices. For example, it can be integrated to the clinical decision support system. Lotta Hamari will tell you about this in her presentation. Then, for example, the nurse guides a person with COPD. She or he has evidence-based self-care instructions at her or his disposal. In addition, she or he considers the patient's own preferences as well as the care context and available resources for self-care. The consistent practice also needs updating. Therefore, it is important to gather follow-up information, evaluate it, and develop these practices further if necessary. In this slide, we have combined the JBI model and FinYhkä as we see them. The JBI model describes the whole evidence-based healthcare process and its different phases. FinYhkä, on the other hand, describes how we can develop evidence-based consistent practices at organizational and unit level, and finally utilize them in decision-making regarding patient care. Finally, I remind all of us that promotion, evidence-based healthcare, and evidence-based practices are the responsibility of all healthcare professionals. Instead, the requirements for different professionals vary according to their education, competence, and tasks. Thank you.
Arja. Our next presentation comes from Oulu. Annukka Tuomikoski, a specialist in clinical nursing science in Oulu University Hospital, will tell us about the action model of expertise called FinAme model. Please welcome Annukka.
Thank you. And first question is this slide. You see it and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Hey everyone. So my name is Annukka Tuomikoski and I work at the Oulu University Hospital as a specialist in clinical nursing science, and it's my pleasure to present you the FinAim, the action model of expertise, how we development it and an updated model. And now it's in English version also. Finnish version you can find in Hotu's website, and the English version, it is coming the website. Arja, is it coming there?
Yes, it is coming, as well as Swedish version.
Okay, nice to hear. Okay, later you can find it there. But first, what this model is, the aims is promote evidence-based nursing, and this model describes the task and activities of expert of nursing, leaders, managers, educators, and researchers in promoting of evidence-based nursing. This model based on JBI evidence-based healthcare model, and it's owned by Nursing Research Foundation, HOTUS. How this process, how this model has been development, it started at the Oulu University Hospital 2008, was the first version, and after that Finnish Nursing Research Foundation together with Finnish Social and Healthcare Ministry has been development it further. Time flies, and 2016 JBI updated the model of evidence-based healthcare, and this model is a background and some kind of framework for this FinAim model. What else have been done? Oulu University of Oulu Research Group have made a systematic review about different nursing professionals' competence of evidence-based healthcare, and those review are also background and framework of this model. Last year, our Finnish Nurses Association, they created a group, expert group for the advanced practice nursing, and the member of this group have been development this model. And here you can see the organization which have been edustaja. What is this? Some people from this organization. This organization is part of this model development process. And this updated model published on this May 2020. As I told, this development process start the evidence generation, and the research group made a systematic review about educators, advanced practice nurses, and nurses' competence of evidence-based healthcare. And this research group made also scoping review about nurse leaders' competence evidence-based healthcare. And JBI model of evidence-based healthcare is a very important framework, this model. Second step was that expert group make first version about this model, and this expert group were clinical nurse specialists in clinical nursing science, researchers, managers, educators, and other experts of evidence-based healthcare. And after that, third phase or step was the evaluation of this model. And we made it that way that we present the first version of model, and external expert group gave feedback and evaluation, and we modified the model after that feedback, and this happened 3 times. And we have quite a large group of experts who gave a feedback, and all national level all over the Finland and different kind of organization. There were educator, managers, leaders, and people who work in hospital setting. And this was the development process of FinAIM. I have my notes here. I have to check out what I have planned. This FinAIM model describe different nursing professionals' task and duty, their role in promoting evidence-based nursing. The first version, what made 2008 and 10, there was only nurses, practical nurses, registered nurses, clinical nurses, and advanced practices nurses. And now, when we updated this model, we want to describe also nurse managers, educators, and researchers, their roles, because they have so big role that promoting of evidence-based nursing. There is a different level nurse managers, and there is also, this is quite new, nursing information management specialist. And I'm not sure, do we have Finland that kind of duty yet, but this is the future. We need that kind of specialist also in hospital setting and clinical field. And also we recognize that nurse educators are they have also big role that they are responsible that the nursing students, they have enough competence to know what is evidence-based nursing and know what their role are in evidence-based nursing. And of course, researchers are very important part of this model. So here you see the different professionals, and these roles put in JBI model of evidence-based healthcare and global health. We little bit change is a question related to health and well-being of population. And then we have evidence generation, synthesis, transfer, and implementation. And here you can see the global health and the management, education, and research expert roles. And some roles are very similar, but there is also some differences. Like managers, their responsibility is to identifying research needs and developing needs, which are important health and well-being of the population. And it's very important that identifying ideas go to the researcher, that researcher know what they should make a research and evidence synthesis, and also that nurse educator know what is today and future competence needs for students. Then we have here evidence generation, and here role is big role. Researcher have big role because they are acting as a team member or leader of research group or development group. Also, nursing managers have role to supporting and acting or part of these group. Then we have evidence synthesis and evidence transfer, and there is nurse educators have a big role evidence transfer, that they education and they disseminating evidence and evidence-based consistent practices through education and use clinical guidelines in they teaching, and they teach students to use clinical guidelines and systematic review. But you can have this later. You can read all them, but I get some things there. Then is the evidence implementation, and every professional group have very important, but also their managers have their duty is promoting and ensure that nurses have enough competence, evidence-based nursing, and they have enough research, like they have enough staff and enough competence and enough can access to databases and that kind of research. Okay, but this was a management, education and research expert, and then we have in this model nursing expert, and those are people who work in the clinical setting, hospital setting, nearby patient. And in Finland, we have practical nurse education. It takes 3 years, and our registered nurse education takes 3.5 years. So I think we have a quite high educated professionals in nearby patient. And then we have also clinically specialized nurse. And then we have that advanced practice nurse model, and they are nurses who has higher educated. They are higher educated, and in Finland we don't know. We don't have national register how many nurse practitioners we have, because this is not so clear for us. But we know that we have clinical nurse specialists. We have 130 in Finland, and they mostly work at the university hospital settings. And their duty and role is more to development and make sure that the hospital have structure to promoting evidence-based nursing and evidence-based healthcare. And then there is the clinical nursing science specialist, and in Finland we have one, and I'm doing that job at the Oulu. But here you can see the roles about the what is global health area, and maybe I will go to next slide. And here you see the evidence generation and evidence synthesis, and practical nurses and registered nurse do not have a role here, but it doesn't mean that they need to know what is a research process, and they need to know what is evidence synthesis process, how to systematic review made, and what is clinical guidelines, evidence-based clinical guidelines, but they don't have a role in practice for this area, like advanced practice nurses have, and they are acting and be part of evidence, make research and be part of systematic review and make clinical guidelines part of the team. So the role is deepened role is advanced practice nurses, evidence generation and evidence synthesis. And then the evidence implementation, and there is some differences, and nurses who are who work in clinical care, their responsibility is that they make their decisions, they use the organization evidence-based guidelines and are critically assessing their own personal work and work units, and they identifying the development needs in nursing, and then clinically specialized nurse and advanced practice nurse, their responsibility is development that evidence-based nursing will happen it, and they develop structure and competence. They develop the competence of nurses for that. Where this model can be used, it can be used when we develop in nursing strategy, in nursing education, also when planning on new job descriptions, or want to develop an organization evidence-based nursing. This give a framework for that. Also, you can use that to definition of evidence-based competence and what kind of competence different professionals need. Thank you. Kiitos, and welcome tomorrow to Oulu. Our conference starts tomorrow, and especially Craig, keep warm. Today, this morning, it was 1 degrees here, but now we have a sunny day and maybe 10 degrees at the daytimes. But thank you. That's what was my presentation, and here's some references. Do you have something to ask or comment?
Do you have snow in Oulu?
No, and no ice beer either.
Greg has not seen snow at all.
Okay.
I am looking forward to joining you very much tomorrow. The next couple of days are going to be great. And I loved your presentation. It was very interesting. I appreciate the English language. Thank you. I think that was for my benefit. It was very kind of you. Thank you. I got a lot out of your talk today.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Annukka. And next we will hear researcher Lotta Hamari's presentation of electronic decision support. Please welcome Lotta.
Thank you. And first of all, I ask if you can see my presentation and hear my voice.
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your slides.
Great. My name is Lotta Hamari and I am a researcher in Nursing Research Foundation. And today in this presentation, I will discuss about electronic decision support and how registered nurses use it in Finland. Electronic decision support gives real-time guidance to healthcare professionals. It brings evidence into practice by helping healthcare professionals to make better decisions in patient care. The system is known to reduce mistakes and thus improving patient safety. In Finland, we use the evidence-based medicine electronic decision support, EPMEDS, which is developed by Duodecim. EPMEDS integrates the patient data in electronic health record with the latest evidence-based knowledge and brings patient-specific instructions to the user. EPMEDS includes reminders, guideline links, drug assistant, form assistant, comprehensive medication review, and diagnosis-specific overview. EPMEDS is platform independent. That means that it can be integrated into any structured and coded electronic patient record. It collects structured patient data from the electronic health record, presents the data into the EPMED engine, and returns the, for example, reminders, guideline links, and alarms. It can also be used to automatically pre-fill forms and calculators with patient-specific data. Patient data can be, for example, drugs, diagnosis, laboratory investigations, risk factors, and previous procedures. And here in this slide, we can see how EPMEDS looks like when a healthcare professional is opening the electronic health record of a patient in Pegasus, which is one of the data systems for electronic health records used in Finland. And in the middle, you can see the recordings made by physicians and registered nurse. And in the right side, you can see the EPMEDS tool. On the top right, the healthcare professional can choose comprehensive medication review, diagnosis-specific overview, or the form assistant where are the calculators and pre-filled forms. Eli in Finnish lääkityksen kokonaisarvio, diagnoosikohtainen yhteenveto, laskurit ja lomakkeet. And in the middle, on the right side on the screen, we can see the reminders, muistutteet, which are tailored based on the patient data. Electronic decision support systems are mainly developed and used by physicians. However, for example, registered nurses' work is nowadays more independent than before, and they would benefit from clinical decision system that is tailored to their needs. Therefore, in Nursing Research Foundation, we have started to develop nursing-specific contents into EPMEDS together with Duodecim. The first action was to integrate one HOTUS guideline, clinical guideline, into EPMEDS and create scripts based on the guideline. The first guideline integrated into EPMEDS was about chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. COPD is a growing healthcare problem as many primary healthcare visits are attributed to this patient group. The aim of the COPD-related national clinical guideline was to focus on the content of health education concerning self-management of COPD. So here you can see just one example what was done. Physician prescribes a new inhaled drug to the patient, and the reminder, muistute, based on the guideline reads as following. The patient received a prescription of a new inhaled drug. advise and show the correct inhaler technique. Check the technique by asking the patient to show how he or she takes the drug. Discuss the importance of oral health. See the guideline by Hotus in Finnish. And this is just one example. We have done other scripts to EPMEDS as well based on this COPD guideline. But this work needs to be continued with other guidelines as well. Another part of this developmental process was to conduct a study and ask how registered nurses and other healthcare professionals, others than physicians, use electronic decision support in Finland. The purpose of the study was to recognize how much nurses use clinical decision support, what factors were associated with it, what kind of organizational support nurses need, and what were their views about clinical decision support developmental needs. We used a cross-sectional study design with electronic questionnaires. We had 14 structured and 9 open-ended questions. Sample consisted of randomly selected primary healthcare organizations in Finland. Sampling was conducted at municipal level using stratified random sampling. The Finnish municipalities were divided between the stratum based on the population. We had a total of 3 large municipalities, 5 middle-sized municipalities, and 10 small municipalities. This is my last slide, and we go back to how EPMEDS looks like in the electronic health record. One of them, Pegasus. Electronic decision support is a brilliant tool also for registered nurses and other healthcare professionals. However, all those who are supposed to use it needs training. One other precondition is that there need to be relevant content for nurses as well. If there is too much information of which only part is relevant for that patient, you probably lose focus and interest to use it. Therefore, development of nursing-specific content to EPMEDS is highly needed. Thank you for your interest. This was my presentation, and if you have any questions, you can email me, or then we will meet at Oulu, some of you. And during the discussion after this webinar, I might be on the train going to Oulu already. So if you have some questions straight to me, so you can ask them now. I think we have some time here also. There is someone who wants to ask.
I don't know why that microphone is not working. Is there someone who wants to ask something?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I was listening to this, and I also noticed that there are different patient recording systems. So is it only for Pegasus or for other patient documenting system also? This EPMED?
It is for all systems that are used in the primary healthcare in Finland. So it can be integrated into any of these health record systems in Finland. But it's in use in other countries as well.
Okay, thank you.
My question was about the same, because I work here in the university hospital. So and now when we get these new areas of health, so what do you think? Could we also have it in our systems? And who is the one? Is it Hotus who are like making or asking this or working for this system for this help to come to different systems?
Hotus is actually making the nursing specific content to EPMEDS. We can do the scripts based on clinical guidelines, but actually there was someone from Duodecim in this webinar as well. But Ilkka Kunnamo is someone who is responsible of EPMETS in duodecim. And yes, I think this is one very important support structure to health and well-being service counties as well, and we should definitely develop it further.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other questions to Lotta? Okay, then we just thank you, Lotta.
Thank you.
See you in Oulu. And next.
So, excuse me, there's a question. So Lotta, if you could write down the answer. Thank you. I also want to see the answer.
Yes, the question is in chat. So Lotta,
it's in the process, not published yet.
Oh, the study, the last question. Yes, actually, sorry, I forgot to mention. This study is now in the manuscript phase, but we will submit it to JBI evidence implementation in the near future. So it's, I hope it's going to be published. And actually, well, yeah, in my slides, I forgot to show the references, but yeah, it's coming.
Okay, thank you. Next, I will now tell you about the assessment criteria for topic proposals of clinical guidelines. Let's see if I can. Just a minute. Okay. I hope you can see the slides now. First, I will tell you a little bit about like a background why we actually need this this kind of assessment criteria to assess the topic proposals of clinical guidelines. The first Nursing Research Foundation guideline was published in 2008. And currently there are 22 guidelines published and 23 are under preparation. And some of these which are under preparation are updates for previously published guidelines, but most of them are new ones. And Nursing Research Foundation's role is to coordinate clinical guideline development. And that means that we receive guideline topic proposals. We prepare the proposals for the meeting where they are either approved or declined. And for this, we need a criteria which guides our decision making and also increases transparency of those decisions. So after approval of a suggested topic, we assemble a group of experts of that topic to prepare the clinical guideline. The Nursing Research Foundation provides education of guideline developing and also mentoring during the whole process. We also organize external reviews where experts and stakeholders have possibility to remark and comment the guideline drafts before they are published. We also give support in the writing process and finalizing the guidelines. And finally, we publish them in our website. So this is basically the guideline development process. And today we are concentrating on the beginning of the process and when we receive the topic proposal and how we assess them and make the decision either to approve or decline the proposal. So this is just a reminder of where the guideline development is located in this model of evidence-based healthcare. So in this JBI's model of evidence-based healthcare, the guideline development is, of course, a part of evidence synthesis phase. The development process means synthesizing evidence. It includes systematic literature search and screening the search results. Critical appraisal of included studies, methodological quality and risk of bias. Extraction of study results and preparing evidence. And then back to beginning. So we receive topic proposals via our website, mostly from healthcare professionals, but sometimes from public as well. And they are all handled in the guideline coordinating group meetings. This group consists of 10 members, all Nursing Research Foundation researchers and director, and also representatives from special and primary healthcare and higher education, both university and University of Applied Sciences. And meetings are quarterly, so 4 meetings per year. So earlier we used this criteria called PRIO, which we tried out in assessing topic proposals. Although we noticed that it was not perfectly suitable for our purposes. It has been developed for medicine, so it did not fit in nursing quite well. So we concluded that there are no criteria which would fit perfectly for our purposes. So we decided that we need to develop a new one. So we used this PRIO criteria as a framework, and then we also took JBI's FAME as another framework. FAME comes from words feasible, appropriate, meaningful, and effective, as you can see here on this slide. That's called JBI's pebble of knowledge, that ball, red ball. So we wanted to assess the feasibility, appropriateness, meaningfulness, and effectiveness of the topic proposals. So we started to discuss what sort of things would go under each theme, meaning feasibility, appropriateness, meaningfulness, and effectiveness. Our aim was that we would carefully assess each of these areas when we consider the proposed topic. So we considered that under feasibility would go the need for practices or methods related to proposed clinical guideline. It contains the prevalence and generality of the phenomenon or health problem, knowledge gaps or inconsistency in knowledge, and load or burden in system, professionals, or economics. Next, the deficiencies in appropriateness of current practices that would contain variation in practices or quality of care, and deficiencies in equality. And meaningfulness, especially meaningfulness for patients or their close ones. Meaningfulness contains also interestingness and topicality of the phenomenon or health problem, and also its relevance to quality of life. Effectiveness is naturally effects that can be achieved by nursing methods or practices. Is there effective methods to affect the health problem? Is it possible to reduce risks and harms? Can health promotion increase the prevention of health problems? Is there other societal impacts? So this was the kind of discuss and reflection we had in the process of developing the new assessment criteria. We also piloted the criteria in the guideline coordinating group and modified it according to the group members' feedback. Then the new FAME criteria was introduced and implemented into practice, which means that it is in use when we assess new topic proposals, and also when someone submits a proposal, they also need to answer these same questions. The final FAME criteria contains the following questions. 1. Is there unjustified variation in care practices? 2. Is there knowledge gaps or inconsistency in knowledge? 3. Does the problem burden social and healthcare organizations? 4. Is the phenomenon or health problem common or general? 5. Can clinical guideline meet the needs raised by the population? And also there are some additional questions which help to consider the answer these questions, such as is the topic interesting and topical? Can it affect the patient's quality of life? Then number 6, can clinical guideline advance the ethics of care? And additional questions, is it related to value discussions prevailing in society? Can guideline advance gender equality? Can guideline advance patients' physical integrity in care? And number 7, is there effective and safe treatments or methods for the phenomenon or health problem? And number 8, is it likely that clinical guideline could reduce serious harm? For example, medication errors, infections, pressure, ulcers, pain, and so on. Then number 9, is it possible to promote health and prevent health problems? And final question, is there possibility to reducing treatment costs? And can absences from work be affected? Can incapacity for work be affected? And can need for institutional or hospital care be affected? And each of these questions are scaled from 0 to 10, and mean of the answers is then calculated. So we get a numerical score for every topic proposal. Then, what impact has this new criteria had? So now we receive much more considered and justified topic proposals, which reduces our work when we prepare the proposals for the coordinating group meetings. Also, our assessment of proposal is easier, more structured, and more transparent. We have now a score for every topic proposal to justify and help our decision making instead of just discussion among the group members. Although we still need the discussion and expertise of the group because we don't have a clear cut point of which score we accept and which we decline. It is rarely that black and white to make these kind of decisions. So this is a great tool to assist the decision making, but we still need the discussions as well. And here you can see the references we used when we were developing this assessment criteria. Thank you for your interest. Okay, well, welcome back. Now we have our keynote speaker, Associate Professor Greg Lockwood from JBI Australia, and he will tell us about JBI support structures for implementation. Please welcome Greg.
Well, hello, everybody. It's good to be with you. It's been a great morning. Some fabulous talks. I've been really excited and motivated by what I've been hearing so far. And not just complexity, of course, although complexity in modelling is interesting, but also the practicality and the applied nature, which I really love. And I think nursing is a practice-based profession. When we talk about applied work, it's always interesting to us. You know, there's always a way to think about it and maybe take it forward in different ways. So I hope you've had a good break, that you grabbed a coffee and that you're feeling a little bit energized. The disclaimer I want to give this morning is that in the last 2 days, I've been flying for about 19.5 hours. And so I have a coffee with me. Excuse my casual familiarity, because during my talk I will drink some coffee, I think. But what I wanted to talk about this morning with you was a fairly broad range of topics. We're going to certainly end up talking about issues related to resourcing for evidence-based healthcare and tools and strategies and things like that. But as you can see, we're going to also look at clinical decision making and then move into more practice change related issues as the basis for evidence-based healthcare. A little bit of background about me, though, which might help you relate to the talk, is that well, you can tell I'm old from my photo, right? Grey beard, grey hair, balding, typical. So my parents were post-war babies, And they grew up in very dramatic kinds of circumstances. The world was rapidly changing around them from the late 40s right until today. And in comparison, I actually thought that my life might be rather boring. Yet here we are. The news cycles we have seen and continue to see, they're frankly astounding. It's astonishing. In a few short years, we are globally transformed. We've had COVID. You've had some, what should we say, some unruly neighbours to your east that have made a bit of a mess of things. And for people like myself from a Commonwealth country, we very recently had the death of Queen Elizabeth II. One of the things that made the news about the passing of Queen Elizabeth was the queue to see her lying in state. It made the news worldwide, I believe, but it certainly did in Australia. The queue was 8 kilometres long. And if you were at the end of that queue, you had to wait between 12 to 14 hours for an opportunity to see the Queen lying in state. Now, transition to Helsinki. I came from Adelaide to Doha to Copenhagen to Helsinki Airport, and I arrived last night in the hotel lobby at 7:30 p.m. I was quite a bit jet lagged, a little bit tired, and I thought I would see a queue, a very orderly queue where I could line up, do my check-in, go to a room, and then have a big sleep. There was no queue. There was a bunch of people standing around in no semblance of clear order, and I really didn't know what that was about. It took me a minute to process what was going on and to understand, was there any system here at all, or was it just people doing what worked for them? And eventually I realized there's a ticket system, and you take a ticket number and you don't need to queue, because they just ring your number and then you go up when it's your turn. So what looked like a mess of people just standing around aimlessly was actually highly organized and coordinated. And there was a system. So once I realized there was a system, I could see that the rest flowed fairly quickly and fairly efficiently. So this morning in this talk, the analogous concept that I want to start with is to really underpin and frame the systems a little bit in terms of structures and functions and language and definitions, because when we understand and we have those shared, then amazing things can happen, as we've seen already from the talks around clinical decision support and the role of guidelines, and the mapping of evidence-based healthcare and evidence-based practice through the unpacking of the model using an empirical process. So that's a very long introduction, which is also a warning to you. I do tend to talk a fair bit, but feel free to sip your coffee, think of some questions, and then let's have a good discussion afterwards as well. But I do, as I get started with this talk, and thinking about the role that knowledge takes in empowering more strategic collaborative activity, I do also want to take a minute to thank the hosts, my hosts and yours, the JBI Finnish Centre, Professor Arja, for her amazing leadership, which I don't know if you know, but it is felt worldwide in terms of evidence-based nursing and evidence-based healthcare. So it is a wonderful pleasure and privilege for me to be with you today. One of my heroes is Professor Alison Tierney, who I had the privilege of working with for a number of years. She came to Adelaide and worked in Adelaide. Open invitation, come to Adelaide. It's a beautiful city, visit us. And she said some words that really impressed me and have stuck with me for a long time, when she said that although science exerts a powerful influence on health, and health is the explicit or the assumed raison d'etre,
of a substantial component of science or a substantial part of science, overall, the connection between these two cultures is a bit unclear. It's a bit weak. There's a gap. And you hear people in evidence-based healthcare talk about the research practice gap. And prior to that, we talked about the praxis practice gap, many gaps that we've been discussing over a long period of time. And in particular, I think these are a challenge for nursing and the allied health sciences. Because although we are good, in fact, nursing, I think in particular, is very skilled and precise at the art and the science of adoption, taking other work from outside the nursing profession and making it nursing work, making it nursing knowledge. There is nonetheless in nursing a weak link between research evidence and practice. And I think this is in part because the language, the evidence types, and even the mechanisms of action for moving knowledge out of the empirical world of science and into the practical applied knowledge world of nursing, well, they're not as connected with nursing culture, education and practice as they could be. And I think some of the quotes we saw earlier this morning about the decision support system, they help back that up in terms of the application in Finland as well. You might be familiar with the work of Martin Eccles and colleagues. When they talk about implementation science, what they talk about is the scientific study of methods to promote the systematic uptake of research findings in other evidence-based practices into routine care, and hence to improve the quality and effectiveness of health services and care. But if you ask a nurse how that's gone over the last 20 years, most of us would say that there's been a preponderance of focus on the effectiveness domains and inadequate attention to many of the other domains that you've already heard about this morning. So feasibility, applicability and meaningfulness, for example. Now, in JBI and in our centre here in Finland, we talk about evidence implementation in a slightly different, more nuanced way, which is a bit more in tune with, I think, the way we should be thinking about implementation for nursing. And that is, we define implementation as a purposeful and enabling set of activities designed to engage key stakeholders, that's you, key stakeholders, with research evidence to inform decision-making and generate sustained improvement in the quality of healthcare delivery. The word empirical doesn't appear in there. Now, that's not to say or to devalue the role of particular types of research, because all research is empirics, but it does better reflect the nature of nursing and the kinds of knowledge that we adopt in nursing and how we then use them. So it's a purposeful and enabling set of activities. Now, this is something nurses are very good at, which is unpacking and standardizing processes of care in order to be able to deliver better, high quality care with less inadvertent variation. To inform our decision making. So not necessarily a rule or a rubric, but the context, because you're the expert in your context. And so we need the knowledge to help inform our decision-making processes as we want to unpack that context within day-to-day practice, which matters deeply, whether you're a clinician or a policymaker, an advanced practice nurse, or you have a specialist research role. There is a blurry line between implementation science and implementation. And we have in JBI an expanding focus on implementation science, but as you would already probably be familiar, we have a core programmatic focus on implementation. And so to guide this talk, we're going to start by looking at some definitions that you're probably a little bit familiar with already around evidence-based healthcare, the constituent domains that underpin it. And then we're going to look afresh at clinical decision-making, sort of as the epicenter, if you will, or the point of impact for evidence. And then we're going to look at processes and models to help inform and underpin that. So I'll just go. All right, so the reason that I guess it's helpful to frame like this is because in JBI, our approach to implementation is centered around audit and feedback. And when you read implementation science and other journals like that, you just don't see a lot of information on audit and feedback. But I think it is part of the natural world and domain of the way nurses think and practice, because we emphasize and focus a lot on structures and processes of care, and audit and feedback is very effective at measuring and then enabling modification of structures and processes to improve the quality of care. So the plan for this talk is to, although you've heard a little bit already this morning, to touch a bit on the JBI mission and vision, what we're on about organisationally. And that I think is helpful because most of what we're on about organisationally is collaboration. And we actually need shared language that is common to nursing globally in order to have good value-driven partnerships. So we'll do that. We'll look briefly at some of the foundational aspects and definitions to set the scene, move on to clinical decision making and how it's structured. And then with that sort of framing in mind, so thinking about what's the kind of knowledge that underpins clinical decision making and what relationship does evidence have to those domains, we'll look more at where JBI resources might be useful in supporting some of those processes. And I'm really not adept at the technology, so you're going to have to bear with me as I fumble around here today. So this is our mission and vision. Our day-to-day work to achieve this vision is encapsulated in the mission itself, which is to synthesize, transfer and facilitate implementation of the best available evidence. We're guided by core values that include mutual respect between nations, professions and cultures. And we seek to have a robust and transparent approach to the production of high quality, accurate information for health professionals and for citizens internationally. So who are we? What is JBI and what are we on about? We're an international research organisation. We're based at the School of Public Health in the University of Adelaide in Australia. And we develop a range of very unique evidence-based information sources, software, education and training programs, particularly using cohort-based training, which I'll be talking about in the next couple of days. And all of this is designed to help increase accessibility and utility of evidence-based information at the point of care for nurses and other practitioners who are interested in using evidence-informed decision-making. So that's the who, what, the where. We're across 40 countries. The model for that is partnership and collaboration. And it's because, as you've already heard this morning, we're all driven by a real desire to look at how we can improve the nature and the quality of care. It actually started with Professor Alan Pearson, who really emphasised that it's important that we can answer a range of clinical questions. And there's a lot said about effectiveness and understanding what works, why it works, and whether those benefits are outweighed by the risks and harms, or whether we should actually move ahead with something based on evidence of effectiveness. But in nursing in particular, he said something very important a long time ago, 2004, when he said evidence-based practice is not exclusively about effectiveness. It's about basing practice on the best available evidence. The diverse origins of the problems in healthcare require the utilisation of a diverse range of research methodologies to generate appropriate evidence. And I think that's the key divider, if you like, or the key uniqueness to JBI's footprint globally. And it's why we have so much collaboration. It's because recognition that nursing isn't as driven by effectiveness of interventions as it is by a broader body of knowledge that encompasses different ways of knowing, some of which is effectiveness, right? We have that. We have some brilliant nurse researchers, and you've heard from some of them this morning. But in addition to that work on effectiveness, we have important knowledge needs because of our direct relationship to patient care. And that's not just about effectiveness. What do patients value? They value high quality care. And a big part of how they measure that is the quality of their relationship with the health professional. That's not effectiveness. That's other evidence, right? So these are important things to share together as we think about this. Now, the reason why we start by framing it is because we want to understand the system. If we understand the system, then we can collaborate, we can partner, we can be effective in the ways we work together. And it's the same with our language and terminology. There's been huge variations in how language has been used, mostly within a medical context. So I talk about evidence-based healthcare, and I think most of us in nursing in particular are nuanced as to the value of having our own evidence base for nursing. But when we go to provide care or to develop policy that relates to the care trajectories of patients, or that relates to primary care models or community policies, etc., the person at the end of the care, they're more interested in a healthcare outcome than a nursing outcome, I think. They're less interested in a medical outcome than they are in a healthcare outcome. And so we talk about evidence-based healthcare because that's probably a truer, more accurate reflection of the patient perspective in this. They don't want to see divided, siloed care. They want everyone to be reaching out to them in a way that works best for them. There was just to reinforce this point, there was a sociologist, William Cameron, and in 1963 he stated, "Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts." And it just is to really re-emphasize we need diverse evidence to answer the diversity and complexity of questions in nursing. Rarely are nurses interested in, we need to test this intervention against one other specific intervention, and then we will decide about the risks versus harms and benefits, and then we'll choose that intervention. We're usually a little more in touch with each other professionally and with our patients, so that our value propositions are slightly different. Not everything that counts can be counted. And immediately you're probably thinking qualitative research, where there's not much counting goes on, right? And not everything that can be counted counts. It's useful for framing and for thinking. You've heard about FAME already this morning, so I won't spend any extra time on it right now. But it is good to be reminded that the empirical basis to nursing knowledge is readily amendable to thinking about evidence-based healthcare and how those things come together. So in terms of defining evidence-based practice, most health professions are starting to embrace this concept of evidence-based healthcare. And so we can, with reasonable shared collaborative confidence, define it as decision-making that considers the feasibility, the appropriateness, the meaningfulness, and the effectiveness of practices. And when we bring those together in a particular way, we see that the best available evidence, along with the context, in which care is delivered, the individual patient and the professional, or if you like, the expertise of the nurse or the health professional, they're all integrated together to inform this process. So evidence-based healthcare is not a process of elimination whereby we say a particular type of evidence overrides the need for example, reasoning or reflection. And, you know, within nursing, reflection on practice is a common and valued phenomenon. I don't know how many other professions do that, but we are certainly encouraged to do it as part of our own professional development. So it's important to ensure that evidence-based healthcare recommendations are taken into proper clinical consideration. But if we do this without the broader context as represented by this Venn diagram, then we actually miss some key modifiers in the process. And that would be, you know, a loss in a sense for nursing as well as for the patients that we care for. I think the other part that I want to touch on for a few minutes is to talk a little bit about clinical decision making. And the reason that it's important to do so is, and this is older data, but it gets backed up by more recent studies all the time, is that there is a really consistent failure to translate research findings into clinical practice. This is medical data, but you might even be familiar with some nurse-led studies that show similar kinds of results that talk about the fundamental challenge that implementation is in our healthcare systems, that look at some of the issues, the barriers around optimization of care delivery, especially when we think about outcomes and costs associated with that, where it's remarkable how nursing is often undervalued in terms of its contribution. So we get looked at as a cost rather than a contribution quite often. And this is really professionally problematic. And our country's ministers need to recognise nursing is not a cost. Nursing is a value add proposition for the health and well-being of the entire population. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay, everyone here agrees, which I'm relieved about because I think we're all nurses. And I hope you agree as well. So when we think about these things, then we see the value of nursing. How really then has implementation been treated historically for nurses and for nursing? And I don't want to offend anyone, but I think that a lot of us, and myself, I'm included here, we fell for something many years ago called the rational actor fallacy. And Jeremy Grimshaw was the first person that I heard talk about this. And he was talking about implementation in the late 80s, early 90s, where we understand that everybody who goes to work, either clinically or in a service related to supporting clinical care delivery, we all go with the best intention. None of us go to cause harm. Well, very few, and those people end up in the newspaper. But none of us go to work intending to do less than our best. And researchers at the time, using very basic models, because there wasn't a lot of conceptualization, really didn't have much to offer except to say, read my paper. And so the belief was, if we published good work, people would read it and do it. And that was never actually true, but it was believed very firmly, and publish or perish became the mantra for academics worldwide. But in fact, that's a rational actor fallacy. It says that if I pass you the right information, that's all you need. Now, you intrinsically know that's not right. And you may even have your own personal examples about how that has failed in the past. I have many examples where I failed in the past trying to use that model. So feel free to talk to me about that at any time as well. But let's talk a bit about what is it about clinical decision making maybe in particular in nursing that's unique and distinctive. So nursing is a person-centered process. You know, maybe there are contrary views around this, but essentially I think nursing is a person-centered process, but it's also very epistemologically driven. Nursing knowledge is what actually drives and equips us to provide the care we do. But knowledge is not one thing, right? Knowledge is a complex integration of a whole range of things. And you've seen some of that in the model in terms of what are the different domains that come together in the Venn diagram and how they inform things. And so I want to spend a few minutes, actually quite a few minutes if you don't mind, looking at 3 types of evidence. I have to warn you online, I've been given freedom to talk longer than my allotted time. And this is a big risk from the organisers to allow me to talk more than my allotted time. And I intend to embrace the moment. So the first one I want to talk about with you is clinical judgment and expertise. This is a whole field of theory, and I can't do a deep dive today into this. But expertise, what is it? Where does it come from? How do you know it when you see it, but how do you know it when you see it? It's the cumulative sum of a range of different things. It includes knowledge because we're epistemologically driven, but it includes more than that as well. And I've just got a message on screen that says we're going to get logged out of Zoom. Have a sip of coffee while we sort out Zoom. The mouse has disappeared. Okay, small intermission. So expertise, as we've just seen, so an example of expertise, it's actually the cumulative sum of a number of different factors, but it's also demonstrated, it's demonstrable. So you know expertise because you see it being used, or other people see it in you and they regard you for it professionally because they see the way you apply it, whether you're in policy, research, administration, or the practice of nursing. Expertise is what guides us through day-to-day routines with some very complex work. I used to work in a dialysis unit. Hemodialysis was my thing. And so you get people in, and I worked in an acute care hospital. So we didn't have patients that were safe for community dialysis. These were very complex cases. They had a lot of cardiomegaly. They had very poor cardiac output as a consequence. They were often fluid overloaded. They had been around for a while and had very poor cannulation potential and a whole range of things. And so you always needed to titrate your dialysis schedule to the individual in a very particular way. That's complicated work. People don't notice it, but it's complex. What about if you're setting up to assist with a CVC insertion, or trying to decide what kind of wound product that you'll put on a wound, because nurses own wound care? There's a lot of knowledge and accumulated expertise that goes into that kind of decision making. And this also helps us with less routine, less task-orientated work. And it includes the ability to make nuanced assessments. And other people might not quite understand how you made that assessment, but you'll be confident in it. So for example, if you look after someone in a chronic care scenario who has asthma, but they don't reliably or regularly use their preventative inhaler medication, even though they know and we know that if they use that inhaler, it improves their quality of life. Or if you think about conversations you've had with anxious families and anxious patients, You've been able to relieve that anxiety. You've been able to provide clarity. That's powerful knowledge. That's influential knowledge. And so as an expert, you draw on significant background and you're able to engage in very situated, positional, context-driven reasoning. And this, leads to a position where we want to value the awareness and the ability to recognize and detect patterns in change. These are characteristics of an expert, and they should be valued and regarded well. So a review, there's been some interesting work done on this as well in terms of clinical judgment and expertise. This is a review paper. You're welcome to look it up. Essentially, though, that it found intuition is a type of knowledge which is quite common in nursing. And it's based on this coming together of knowledge and experience to help inform clinical judgments. If you read up on intuition, some people say that when you walk into a room or environment, you will make up to 10,000 observations in the first few seconds, most of which never register in your frontal lobe. So they're not in your conscience, they're in your subconscious, but they might come back later and help complete a picture that helps you understand the context and what's going on. Maybe the same way that I eventually understood that there was a ticketing system and a structure to the way the hotel was running things. So in I say our, because I am a nurse, but in our relationships with patients, nurses use intuition to help connect people and care. The nursing process, for example, includes support and guidance that draws on the kinds of clues that we find in clinical care and in decision making, and helps to validate those decisions. This particular systematic review on clinical intuition in the nursing process and decision making concluded that nurses integrate intuition and analytics, empirics, if you will, and the synthesis of data when using their clinical judgment. And it's a process based on direct perception, knowledge, and the accumulation of past experience. So intuition has a key role in evidence-based healthcare. And I expect you didn't expect to hear anyone say that. Intuition has a role to play in evidence-based healthcare because we have empirics, but we also have clinical judgment and reasoning. And this, therefore, is important to us. It is, though, to be really clear, not enough for evidence-based healthcare for one to be an expert and to have good clinical judgment. The patient's preferences are really critical in this entire cycle as well, aren't they? And that's a kind of knowledge that we need to integrate with our decision making. So the second type of knowledge that we're going to spend a few minutes on is patient-centered knowledge, which is often expressed as the patient's preferences, beliefs, or perspectives. Now, I worked in chronic hemodialysis, so all my patients had fairly deep knowledge of their disease, their health, their well-being, and they integrated that within their socially lived lives. And this is true in many fields where nursing care is provided. Our patients develop their own knowledge and their treatment preferences. And if they didn't have them before, they have them now thanks to Dr. Google, where they look something up, decide what the problem is, and find the treatment strategy as well. So they do develop their own distinctive knowledge and treatment preferences. We know from external empirical evidence that patient preferences affect treatment adherence and treatment effectiveness. So the conclusion of that is we need to be clear on what's important to our patients. And this is particularly so, for example, in chronic and in infectious diseases. So in asthma, for example, or COPD management, if an inhaler works well for a patient and is easy to use, they're more likely to use it. So what patient preferences might influence inhaler use? And it might sound a little too simplistic for you, but think about it. The design of the inhaler Because who gets COPD? It's older adults. They might have some rheumatoid or some osteo in their hands. So is it easy to hold? Is it easy to manipulate and use? Is it easy to store or to carry throughout the day? Is it easy to keep clean? What about dry powder versus pressurized metered dose inhalers? What about once a day versus a requirement to use it multiple times a day? In dialysis, we get frustrated with patients that don't stick to their restrictions because those are important for their life. In patients with respiratory conditions that require preventative medication, it's the same. And we often say patients are non-adherent. We used to say non-compliant. Aria, do you remember? We used to say patients were non-compliant. And now we soften this by saying non-adherent. It's actually the same underlying issue. What it means is we haven't understood the full social context for that individual. We haven't unpacked it. So we need to do more of that. Let's take this asthma example a little bit further. So this is a study that looked at the clinical implications of unknown patient preferences and non-adherence associated with expressed preference for once daily medication over twice daily medication, for reporting non-adherence. So you can see people preferred once daily medication, even if the twice daily medication was more effective. So they wanted less medication in their lives. Patients reported non-adherence. Patients who reported non-adherence had negative beliefs about their treatment as well. They were not that happy. They found they had concerns that were unresolved. They found medication intrusive, and they had worse overall control. So the data shows that patient preferences are important in clinical decision-making. These are factors that affect adherence and treatment efficacy. And if I'm a clinician, then I can't rely on my own expert knowledge and judgment. I need to understand this. And if I don't ask the patient, I can't understand this. All right, so the third, of course, is evidence. And I might go a little bit quicker over this section because I've burned 45 minutes of my time already. So empirical evidence is the third type of knowledge, where we say clinical decision-making includes expert clinical knowledge, the patient's preferences, views and beliefs, and we might embed that within an advanced scope of practice to include access to up-to-date evidence at the point of care. The problem for us as nurses is the challenges and difficulties in getting access to clinical knowledge. Sorry, getting access to this kind of knowledge in the clinical setting. We're at the point of care. We work intensively with patients. We don't have the freedom to go off readily and do research or to investigate things. And so this creates a big barrier for nurses if they don't have things readily available at the point of care for them. What does that lead to? Well, that leads to us really drawing on tacit knowledge. We know each other well, we know who the experts are, and we therefore tend to rely on other people's expertise when we have a problem or when we need to fill a gap in our knowledge or skill base. And that's normally a fairly reliable process, right? You recognize who an expert is, you talk to them, you learn from that, and away we go. But it also means that for years, we've gotten by without access to explicit, pre-appraised, pre-summarized, best available evidence-driven knowledge. And because we've relied on expertise, we haven't been as loud with policymakers and funders about the imperative that we have access to that kind of knowledge and information. And in that regard, we may have done ourselves a small disservice. So we want to then move from thinking about decision-making to action-taking. And this is a quote I made up that I'm very proud of. Knowledge is necessary for action in clinical decision-making, but knowledge is not action, nor is it a guarantor of action. Instead, if we want to see change, then change requires leadership. Change requires awareness and consideration of human behaviour. In other words, let's leave the rational actor fallacy behind us professionally now and move on knowing that practice change isn't about practice, it's actually about people change. So not what needs to change, but who needs to change what. I'll just say that again. Not what needs to change, but who needs to change what. Make it about the person, and then we have a more dynamic approach to the way we manage these things. And we want change processes that are accessible, low cost, and sustainable. I mean, if you have the funding to do a step wedge trial for implementation, fantastic, and I'd like to join you. But generally, it's a challenge to get research funding for nursing. And given that we are the largest workforce with the most patient exposure time, that I think is a shame. But we are adaptable, and therefore we need change processes that are accessible at the point of care. In other words, that I shouldn't have to go and do a double degree to learn how to do it. Should be low cost because of the volume-based approach to care, and it should be sustainable in both its own mechanism of action and the results that it produces. So I won't spend any time here because I'm trying to steal a few more minutes. But we want to move from the conceptual and the epistemological, which is what we talked about nursing as being, into a more applied or action-orientated state. And that's around skills and knowledge. It comes from I guess, a need for nursing to continuously challenge itself around how are we providing for ourselves as a profession. Professor Alison Tierney, in a talk that I heard years ago, said we need to ask ourselves some foundational questions before we ask others to engage with us professionally. Who are we educating, and for what purpose? How many, and for what roles and responsibilities? What about the form and the level of that education at what time points in somebody's career? And a lot of this has been done in Finland, this work, we've already seen it this morning. But in JBI, we try to translate this into relevant clinically applied opportunities for training. So we have the evidence implementation training program, we have a shorter version, which is a 3-day workshop, clinical leadership workshops, and other kinds of approaches to enabling and equipping nurses with sustainable, easily accessible, low-cost solutions to working to improve care practices and outcomes. So the last part of my talk is around tools and resources. And is it okay if I've got 15 more slides? Yeah. It's okay that I've got 15 more slides. Yeah. Right. So A, I hope you've still got your coffee. B, I hope you've been thinking about a couple of questions, but not hard ones. All right. So in JBI, implementation is a big driver for us. It's my entire program is implementation. And we've got quite a significant body of resources that can help with that. The first, and we'll go through these in a little bit more detail. So PACES, just to briefly tell you though, is audit and feedback driven software. And if you've done a high degree or you've worked in systematic reviews, then you know that the most user-friendly approach to software is software that maps the process of the review. So as you progress through the software, you're progressing through the process. And I'm pleased to say PACES is very much the same. I'll explain a bit more in a minute. If we want good implementation, and I'm the editor of one of these journals, JBI Evidence Implementation, the biggest issue for me as an editor is a lack of clarity and consistency in people's understanding of methods and process to inform healthcare change. So we have the JBI Manual for Evidence Implementation, which if you're interested in this work, look it up. It's an open access resource that provides detailed guidance. Of course, there's the education programs as well. And, you know, we have a lot of, as part of the Evidence Implementation Journal, we've established a global network with a Twitter account and an e-bulletin, which you're all welcome to, really welcome to have a look at. Let's just spend the last couple of minutes looking at some of these tools and resources. So PACES, as you can see on screen, it stands for the Practical Application of Clinical Evidence. It's a systematic driven approach to audit and feedback using evidence-based audit criteria. So you'll be familiar with audit. In this regard, PACES is different because the criteria are informed by evidence, which means that we're not benchmarking against a local standard so much as we are against the international evidence base. And that means that when we change care or change structures and processes of care, we can be quite confident that what we're doing is improving to a more international benchmark than say local consensus around what those sorts of things should be. It's accessed just via the internet. You don't have to download anything to use it, and it's really helpful for any aspect of, particularly of nursing care, because we're very structure and process driven in the way we manage and organise the delivery of nursing care. So it can be used for quality improvement, can be used for audit and feedback, it can be used for implementation planning, the collection of outcome data, performance measures, and also different kinds of research projects. So if you think about project management and how detailed that is, PACES embeds all of that. So it embeds setting up a team, selecting a topic, sampling, and you can do sampling in 3 or 4 different ways, but if you need to use a power calculation, then that's embedded in the software, so it can help with determining your optimal sample size for a particular level of precision or magnitude. And so you can do a range of things in PACES. I'd encourage you to check it out more. There's already been a few talks about databases and data-driven point of care or clinical decision support systems this morning. So here's ours. We have, you might call them rapid reviews, we call them evidence summaries, and this is a bit out of date, so there's over 4,000 summaries, largely on nursing topics. So what is the best available evidence for patient education for self-administration of insulin for people with diabetes, type 1 diabetes, or almost any topic you can think of? There is evidence summaries, which is a concise kind of summary of the current best practice evidence. Recommended practices are procedural descriptions that are informed by those evidence summaries, and best practice information sheets are a 4-page summary of systematic reviews. So they're a great resource. All of these are available in the database, and I hope one day that we can see this database or parts of it made available to you at the point of care through your own clinical decision support systems as well. But feel free to check it out, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me and I can send you some examples of those kinds of things. We've got as further resources that could be helpful to you, 2 key journals, which is the Evidence Synthesis Journal, where they publish systematic reviews, scoping reviews, other kinds of reviews such as umbrella reviews, our own journal and the manual as well. The idea behind having all of this available is, of course, to try and expand the toolbox that is available to people to inform clinical decision making. It's not to do implementation alone, but to facilitate and enable organisations to become or expand their capacity for evidence-based practice and become an evidence-based organisation. So this speaks to EBP not being an addition or an add-on, but an integrated part of professional practice and the way we organise care in ourselves as organisations. Because implementation is about reviewing practice against the best available evidence. It's partly about determining compliance with best practice recommendations, then implementing change strategies, then remeasuring to determine whether or not we've had a beneficial effect. This is the bread and butter of nursing. In essence, I believe very strongly nursing and nurses should drive this. It also speaks to a sophisticated insight that is particular to nursing in the way we maintain and modify practice change within our organisational context. Because obviously we can't work as individuals. Nursing is one of those professions where we're team-driven and partnership-driven. So when we talk about getting research into practice, and I'm reasonably close to the end of my talk, I promise, but when we talk about it, this is an example flowchart of one implementation project done by a nurse in San Francisco. And this is just the organisational work that was embedded in an audit and feedback project. So we can conclude from here that a nurse is able to navigate the organisational leadership buy-in requirements, that they're able to engage relevant stakeholders and get them on board with the process to enable a sustainable integrated practice change project, that they're able to lead on unpacking and identifying the local context, to lead and direct project-related work, and to really bring all this together in quite a sophisticated and comprehensive approach. And I think this is characteristic of the ability and skills that nurses bring to what they do. So if I was to back that out and then go, what does that look like? Then maybe it looks like what you already largely have set up in Finland, thanks to the leadership of Professor Arja Holopainen, which is to mobilise leadership and collaboration to agree on what are the key challenges that we face and get consensus on which ones of those we're going to deal with in which degree of prioritisation. And then, of course, to build and establish our expertise. And I think this is the bit that's more challenging for nurses, is what kind of expertise, or to quote Professor Alan Tierney again, educating who, for what, to what level. There is a real valuable role here for cohort short course-based education to deliver specific technical skills and knowledge. But then, of course, we need those translational pathways to move from what audit and feedback represents, which is that small-scale rapid cycle change process, so that we can enable growth while generating further impact. So we need those things such as partnership support and priorities setting. We need to think about sustainability, scale up and monitoring. And of course, ways of doing that sit outside our own immediate structure can often be helpful. JBI has a program called Endorsement, and I've just got 3 slides left, which are about endorsement. Endorsement is a vehicle for achieving sustainable implementation targets in partnership, so that we're combining resources, skills and competencies of different groups and sectors to address implementation challenges, and then provide reward and recognition for having achieved that. So as you can see, there's only 3 criteria for endorsement, so it's not a complicated process or procedure. But it is about collaborative partnerships to engage with each other, to access and support resources, to facilitate quality improvement processes at the point of care. We have a number of groups, largely clinical care providers around the world, that are already engaged with JBI in this program. Here's a little list of them, and I don't know, but I wonder if this would be of interest in Finland as well. And I'd be really keen to talk to anybody who's a bit interested in thinking about it. Having something like an organisationally driven resource to help with sustainability and the programmatic nature of what we want to achieve with particular tools and resources is a way of helping nursing to drive itself professionally into the future. So I want to thank you for the extra time that I have been able to take today, and for the opportunity to present some of this work with you as well. And I hope that's been useful. Thank you very much. Okay, so if you do have any questions, or if you've written something in the chat, feel free to flag that. Wow, that's a complicated question. It's a great question though, and somebody should write a paper about this. If we have evidence that is effective, is that enough by itself, or should we also understand meaningfulness or feasibility or appropriateness? In other words, is one domain enough by itself, or do we need the others as well? And yes and no, I think, is the answer. So a lot of research does look at meaningfulness. Nurses in particular are really good at the qualitative inquiry that helps us better understand what's going on with patients and their experience of the health system. We're driven by an interest in this phenomena of patient care and its meaningfulness to our patients. In fact, we do that even though we don't understand how much of nursing care is effective. So we have a big gap in our knowledge base where we have inadequate evidence of effectiveness for much of what we do. But we have a fair amount of information about what patients find meaningful. And conversely, we have some evidence of effectiveness, but not so much on the meaningfulness. There was a randomized controlled trial some years ago, which found, I'll just use a clinical example here. And the trial found that if you remove an indwelling urinary catheter at midnight, you get more timely patient discharge from hospital the next day, you get less urinary retention and reduced incidence of need to recatheterize. But they didn't have the evidence of meaningfulness. So catheters were being removed at midnight, and it was helping with those three metrics, but patients hated it. Why? Because it's really hard to sleep in a hospital. And by the time you get to sleep, and if you then have somebody come along and remove a catheter from you, it's very hard to then get back to sleep because of the noise in the environment. So if we want to get a really comprehensive picture of an aspect of care, ideally we would look at effectiveness, meaningfulness, and then in terms of the implementability, we'd look at the appropriateness and feasibility. So preferably we have them all, but it's not necessarily true that we always have them all. So we also then rely on expertise and other forms, particularly of tacit knowledge of our colleagues, right? So yes and no. It's good to have more than one domain, but it's not always available to us. The second question is, what's it like in Australia regarding evidence-based practice? And it's an interesting question. There's a lot of new work coming out. There's a lot of innovation in collaboration coming out in Australia. And this includes the formation of clinical groups that are within and across organisations who are drawing on resources like the ones that I talked about in the last part of my presentation, to have a common basis for practice so that when you do translational work and do some implementation work, there is that ability for it to be transferable across settings and across patient groups. We are starting to see the rise of the clinical implementation scientist in nursing. And that's an interesting role, to see nurses take that on as a banner and then lead organisational practice change. The area where we still fall down in Australia is in point of care access to resources. And I think maybe you struggle with the same thing here, in that you have your online systems for care planning, etc., but there's not great integration of evidence that makes evidence available for you when you actually need it. And so we have those kinds of challenges with that, and perhaps also with the tension between our high degree programs, such as graduate certificates, research masters or PhD, and then the world of implementation based on evidence. And that gets back to the quote from Alison Tierney at the start of this talk about that disconnect and that tension between the science and the I guess the expertise and the art of the practice of nursing, where it would be good to see how better cohort or expert-based training like JBI provides actually fits and models to high degree education, because nurses love high degree education and enjoy participating in it, particularly when it leads to specialist clinical qualification, right? So how do we get better integration at that point, I think is an interesting question. I think that's it for our questions. So thanks again. That's been awesome that you've let me talk so long. I think you deserve something special after that.
Thank you, Craig. That was really interesting and inspiring. Our next speaker is a researcher, Heidi Parisot, and she will open up the results from the national survey, actualization of evidence-based nursing in Finland. Please welcome Heidi.
Thank you, Kristiina. I will share my slides. A moment. Bit more. Yes. So thank you for the nice presentations and also for Craig for the inspiring talk. But now we will look how is the situation at the moment in Finland. So what is the current state of evidence-based nursing based on a national survey that was conducted by the Nursing Research Foundation. And my name is Heidi Parisot, as Kristiina said, and I'm a researcher at the Nursing Research Foundation. So the purpose of this national survey was to describe what is the current situation in Finland regarding evidence-based nursing and its support structures. And as Arja Holopainen said in the beginning, in Finland we have written in our legislation that healthcare should be based on evidence, and this is a requirement for nursing as well. And this is why we are evaluating what's happening in Finland regarding that. We conducted the first survey in 2017, and now the second one at the end of last year. And the purpose is to continue these surveys and follow up the situation every 3 years. So what we did in 2021, the target group, it was more varied than in 2017. And the target population of the survey were the different nursing professionals working in social and healthcare organizations. So we included nursing leaders and managers, those working in clinical nursing as clinical nursing specialists, and those working in clinical practice. And last year we included first time also practical nurses, besides registered nurses, public health nurses, midwives and paramedics. And the instrument that we used last year, we further developed it after the one we used in 2017, and we further developed it based on evidence and theoretical models of evidence-based healthcare and nursing. And we included the many different domains. One of that was evaluation, what is the actualization of evidence-based nursing. And then we have several others concerning the organizational support structures for evidence-based nursing. And we also asked the respondents to evaluate their own competencies, attitudes, and actions. And we partly used a previously developed and validated instrument and items from that, the instrument developed by Rubin and Paris. And we included the items with their permission to be used in as part of our instrument. So the data were collected in September, October last year, and we had the questionnaire available in Finnish and Swedish languages. And the electronic questionnaire, it was distributed via nursing unions and associations. So we had really comprehensive group of these unions and associations via them, via who we distributed the questionnaire. And the questionnaire, we included their background questions and then items from the instrument actualization of evidence-based nursing. Then we asked some feedback about Nursing Research Foundation's products. And then we also included open-ended questions about evidence-based nursing development needs. In this presentation, I concentrate on those structured questions and the statistical data that we have. And the participants, we asked them to evaluate what they think about the current situation regarding evidence-based nursing, and they could answer on a 5-point Likert scale to the different items in the instrument. So in total, we got 1,595 answers from nursing professionals. The largest amount of respondents were those who were working in clinical practice, over 1,200 respondents. We had also 90 persons who were working in clinical nursing specialist positions, and a bit over 200 of those working as nurse leaders and managers. We had respondents from all parts of Finland, and the mean age was 46.6 years, and most of the respondents were females. So we asked how they think, what is the current state, how the evidence-based nursing is, what is the situation in Finland, and we had 4 items regarding that. So we asked them that do they agree that evidence-based nursing is well executed in their organization, and we have calculated here the percentages of those who agreed or totally agreed with this statement. So of those who were nurse leaders or nurse managers, so 36.6% of them either agreed or totally agreed with this statement. Those working in clinical nursing specialist positions, over 27% of those agreed. And those working in clinical practice, 31.1% of those respondents agreed or totally agreed with this. So we can see that those working in nursing leader manager positions were more positive about the situation, and those working in clinical nursing specialist positions were the most critical ones regarding this item. If we compare regarding the 3 other items, the results that we got in 2017 and those we got now 2021, and looking at the answers of those working in clinical practice, in 2017 they were all registered nurses, So in 2017, those registered nurses say that the care instructions are based in evidence, so 55% of them agreed with this statement. And in 2021, we asked a bit differently. We asked about the nursing instructions, are they based on evidence? So the same 55% of those working in clinical practice agreed with this. Then we asked also, are the instructions provided for patients, are they based on evidence? And 51% in 2017 and 58% last year agreed with this. So we can see a slight improvement in this area. And then we also asked what they think, do the nursing practices, are they based on evidence? So in 2017, 42% agreed, and now last year the number was 48%. So again, a bit better here. So not much, but still some movement towards better. But it's also good to notice that there is still a large amount of nurses who didn't agree or couldn't say, are the care instructions, the instructions provided to patients, and the nursing practices, are they based on evidence? And even more larger number of those who didn't agree that evidence-based nursing is well executed in their organization. We also asked about the organization support structures from many different perspectives. I have put here what was the evaluation of the practices, how the nursing practices are monitored and evaluated within their organization. We also asked that how evidence is disseminated within their organization, what is the situation of development and implementation of evidence-based practices, and so on. And we had many different statements where we asked their evaluation, and we calculated a sum value for each of the domains. And here I present the mean values of the different participant groups for each of the domains. So for what is the situation in their organization about monitoring and evaluating nursing practices, those working as nurse leaders and managers, the mean value of the sum of items was 35.7, when the maximum was 50. And the higher the mean value, the more positive is the evaluation about the support structures within the organization. And those working in clinical nursing specialist positions, their mean value was 32.7, and the maximum was also 50. And we can see throughout the results that those working as nurse leaders and managers evaluated the support structures more positively than those working as clinical nursing specialist positions. And then those working in clinical practice, their mean was 21.3, but the scale was different because we had a different amount of items, and a bit also we asked a bit differently depending on to which group the respondent belonged to. So here the maximum was 28, so we can't directly compare these three different groups. And in the graphical the figure, I have some bars that represent different contexts where those working in clinical practice as nurse in clinical practice, where they worked and how their evaluations distributed depending on at which context they were working. So the highest bar was for those who were working at university hospital in somatic wards or clinics. So they evaluated this the most positive, this support structure in the organization. And the 3 lowest ones are for those who were working in other hospitals than university hospitals, and they're in psychiatric wards and polyclinics, those working in healthcare centers, and those working in first aid. Another example of the organizational structures, I have put here the organization culture towards evidence-based nursing. So we, again, as with many different items, what is the culture within the organization, whether it supports evidence-based nursing or not. And again, here we can see that those working as nurse leaders and managers have evaluated this more positively than those working as clinical nursing specialist positions. And again, those working in clinical practice, the scale was a bit different. But again, if we look at the picture, and the highest bar, which is remarkably higher than the other ones, is the preventive healthcare. So those who were working in child health clinics, maternity clinics, school healthcare, for example, they have evaluated that the organization culture is more positive towards evidence-based nursing than the other contexts. Then we asked also the respondents to evaluate their own evidence-based nursing competencies, attitudes, and their own actions, practices regarding evidence-based nursing. And here we can see that those working as clinical nursing specialists, they evaluated their own competencies more positively than those who were working as nurse leaders and managers. And this same situation was also for the attitudes and the own actions that they take and do. And again, those working in clinical practice, the scale was a bit different, so we can't compare these directly. But if we look those who were working as nurses in clinical practice, how their evaluations distributed depending on the professional group they belong to. So those we couldn't put into the other professional groups, we call them other nursing professionals. They evaluated their competencies most positively. But at second place, they are paramedics, and then comes midwives and public health nurses. And the most negative evaluations were from those who were working as practical nurses. And here are the results regarding their self-evaluation of their own evidence-based nursing practices. Again, here, those working as clinical nurse specialists evaluated their actions more positively than those working as nurse leaders and managers. And regarding those who are working in clinical practice, of those, the most positive evaluations gave those who were paramedics or belonged to the other nursing professionals group. And the most negative evaluation was from those working as practical nurses. One thing that we also asked how they think how they evaluate the support that they have received from nursing leaders and managers within their organization. And this is something we asked from those working as clinical nursing specialists and those working as nurses in clinical practice. Here, those working as clinical nursing specialists, their mean value was 23.9, and those working in clinical practice was 21.9, and in both the maximum was 40. So it seems that those working as clinical nursing specialists evaluated the support more positively. And within those working in specialist positions, those who were working at university hospitals evaluated this most positively, and those who were working in other than university hospital gave the most negative evaluations. And of those working in clinical practice, those who were working in preventive healthcare evaluated the support most positively, and those working in primary healthcare centers, at wards, outpatient clinics, had the most negative evaluation of this professional group. Then we asked about the Nursing Research Foundation role and feedback about our products. So we asked how well known our HOTUS guidelines and evidence tips are. So of those respondents, from 52.2% to 81.1% said that they know our HOTUS guidelines. And the lowest number, the 52.2, was from those who were working in clinical practice, and those who were working as clinical nursing specialist positions. It was the highest, the 81.1%. And among those who were working in clinical practice, those working as practical nurses knew HOTUS guidelines weakest. And for evidence tips, the results were similar. And so those who were working in clinical practice, 31.4% of them knew evidence tips, and those working as clinical specialists, it was over 60% of those respondents who knew evidence tips. And then we asked also other kind of feedback of our products. For example, how easy they are to find, do they meet the needs in clinical practice, are they understandable, and also do we inform enough about the new guidelines. And the other items, or what we asked, they looked quite the same. The mean values were over 3, but for the informing about the new guidelines, it was under 3, and we have now noticed this, and we have done already a lot in informing, but we will do even more in the future to spread the knowledge of our products. So what we can conclude about these results, these were not all that we have gathered the results, because there were many different domains, for example, related to the support structures that I only gave you now a short introduction, what kind the results were. But as a conclusion, we can say that there are still several development needs regarding evidence-based nursing in Finland. And the development needs, they were mainly concentrated on the different organizational support structures and the support that's received from nurse managers and leaders. And regarding the self-evaluations of competencies, attitudes, and practice, own practice, those working as practical nurses gave the lowest evaluations regarding these three different areas. And so in the future, we need to pay even more attention to practical nurses, because this obligation to evidence-based nursing, it's a requirement for all nurses, practical nurses as well. And of the different contexts where nurses are working, the university hospital and preventive healthcare, it looked that the results were most positive in these contexts. So we need to look more closely, especially to these contexts. So what we can learn from there, that could help also nurses working in other contexts to provide evidence-based nursing. But it should be noticed that these were only descriptive results, and making for more firmer conclusions about the differences and what explains these results, we still need to do more analysis, and that's something that we are currently doing. So we are still conducting the further analysis to give some firmer conclusions, and also we are writing scientific international articles about the results. So, but if you are interested, the whole descriptive report is available, unfortunately only in Finnish, but you can find it on the Nursing Research Foundation's website, and there are also many different tables where you can look item by item what the respondents have answered to them. So thank you for your interest.
Thank you. Thank you, Heidi. Now we have some time for questions and comments, and we had some very good comments here from Kristina Junttila. I agree that evidence-based nursing is not well recognized by nursing staff, and we have a lot of work still to do. How could we get nurses to understand that it's not something extra? It should be that everything should be based on that. Is there any other comments here? Arja or Greg, do you want to say something about this?
It's a way to do some work. Greg, you have some comments.
Yeah.
This.
Look, I would like to comment, but Arja is the boss. So what she says is right. I think we.
Are you sure?
It's a very big question, but I think we have to define our expectations. So when we say the concept is not well recognised by nursing staff, when and in what circumstances do we really need evidence? Do you need an empirical study to suggest that as we provide a bed bath for a patient, we should inspect their skin integrity? No, we don't actually need a study on that anymore, do we? We understand that there's a lot of nursing care that is routine, but still good practice. So that's evidence-based approach to care. And so I think if we define the expectation as more and more nursing practice will be underpinned by empirical research, then we're not actually getting to the heart of what's needed. Because when do nurses need access to evidence? There's a little bit of research around this already, and it says that we need access to evidence if we're newish, if we're doing something newish, or if we do something rarely, or if we're introducing a new innovative approach. So I'm old, and I remember when vacuum wound dressings, so topical negative pressure, came into care, and we needed evidence because we didn't know much about it or how to use it. But what we didn't need evidence on by that stage was which moist wound healing product to use, because the supply system for wound healing products had caught up with the evidence, which meant that the choices available to me as a nurse were all moist wound healing. I didn't need new evidence on that. So if we define our expectation around evidence as we must have empirical research for everything, then we will be disappointed with ourselves professionally. But if we equally regard our expertise and the ability to tap into the patient's preferences and values and recognise that a lot of routine care might not need a study, then I think we're further along than we might give ourselves credit for.
Would you think about if those practices varies a lot? Could there be one reason that there are also old-fashioned practices?
Yeah. That's a really good question for nursing, because what we tend to do is pick up new practices or new innovations, but we don't de-implement very well. And we don't have the best systems for enabling de-implementation. So it is worth and very valuable exercise to look at current care and have questions like, why do we do this way? Or is there an alternate technique that could be useful in this regard? From that, what we also then need is accessible methods and systems by which we can not only pick up an innovation or an adaptation, but also de-implement things and remove them from the integration within our organisations and reporting systems and structures. And I don't think we have a good mechanism for that in nursing yet.
Thank you. These comments. Yeah, there are some other comments and questions. Don't we have organizational barriers in the implementation of evidence-based practice in nursing care? Probably we do.
I guess actually, yes.
There was a question about how we asked about evidence-based nursing in our questionnaire. In the beginning of the questionnaire, we defined what we mean by evidence-based nursing, and also the statements, the items with which we asked the respondents the different things. We didn't ask using the evidence-based nursing. We tried to clarify it and make it more practical in the questions, but I agree with Juttila Kristiina that we still need to open and discuss it in more practical level in nursing, so that everyone understands what is evidence-based nursing, and it's not something that's not the base of nursing. It's that it's something additional to that what we do. So there's still work to be done.
Yeah, that's true. We have a lot of work to do with that. But okay, I think our time is up. Or yeah, our last speaker is our Deputy Director of Finnish Center of Evidence-Based Healthcare, Virpi Jylhä, and Virpi will have the concluding remarks. Please welcome Virpi.
Thank you, Kristiina. It's my pleasure to be here at this webinar today. I prepared a couple of slides for these closing remarks. First of all, I would like to thank you for arranging this webinar. We have heard great examples and models of evidence implementation. And I really hope that these actions and models will be utilized vitally to improve evidence-based practices in healthcare. At the end of this webinar, I would like to use a few minutes to emphasize 3 points that I see important. However, before that, I present very shortly our prostate research project, which strongly relates to the content of this webinar. We have a 3 + 3 years project funded by Strategic Research of Academy of Finland. It's reliable knowledge for healthcare, process and practice of shared decision making, and we aim to improve patients' and professionals' involvement in decision making processes and to promote the utilization of different kind of evidence and information. Here we have 4 different work packages. Each of them focuses on different kind of evidence or information. The first one here concerns integration of economic information into clinical practice guidelines. And the second, the development of a process to use evidence for de-implementing low-value care. It means the care that doesn't work, that doesn't produce health outcomes. And third one, we develop a digital tool for patient-generated electronic data to integrate patient preferences and values into decision making. And that's the work package where I'm working, and we focus on patient-generated data in decision making. And then we have work package 4 that focuses on decision making processes. And the overall aim is to improve decision making and focus on evidence-based shared decision making. Every time I present this figure, I add here the word evidence, because that's the key here. We need evidence in our decision making to be effective and to achieve health outcomes. And the overall aim of our project is responsive, high quality, sustainable healthcare. Let's see how it happens. But as I said, we need different kind of information. This is the couple of evidence from JBI model of evidence-based healthcare, as you know very well. I put it here because I want to emphasize that we very often focus on effectiveness only. It is important as the basic principle on healthcare is do not cause harm. Besides of effectiveness, the interventions need to be meaningful for a patient and feasible and appropriate in current situation and context. For example, if patient doesn't experience that effective medication that is prescribed to them is meaningful, they leave it to the pharmacy and don't get the benefits of the treatment. And that is why we need evidence from these 4 viewpoints. And we need to take that evidence into account when developing practices. And if we don't have evidence, we don't have evidence-based practices either. We need high-quality evidence from different viewpoints, and that's my first point. Evidence needs to be synthesized as systematic reviews, evidence summaries, and clinical practice guidelines. And it is vital that we have national organizations like HOTUS that synthesize evidence. And those organizations, they need adequate resources. They need money to do that important work. And I believe that the money will be paid back in better outcomes of care and in better practices. Healthcare environments are complex. No single linear approach to implementation of evidence-based practices will succeed in moving evidence into practice. That's my second point. That's why well-planned, targeted implementation models and methods, we have heard examples of those today, needs to be used. We need to integrate new evidence into practice workflows and information systems as well. Besides implementation on new practices, we need to remember the implementation of care that doesn't work. I think this is as important as the implementation of new practices. My third point is evaluation. And here I mean the fidelity of processes and predefined outcomes that are followed up. The evaluation process should be clearly defined and planned in the organizational level. The planning includes identification of responsibilities and data management plans. And it's always tempting to collect new data when evaluating something, but it is important to identify how the existing data sources, such as patient records, can be utilized in this evaluation. Information is required on how updated practices affect care outcomes from different perspectives. For example, patient outcomes, nursing outcomes, and also financial costs. So these are my 3 points based on today's webinar. Thank you for participating.
Thank you, Virpi. Very good points. And thank you all speakers today. Thank you all of you participating. And I think many of you we will meet tomorrow in Oulu, and all the others have a really nice autumn. See you.